Today, we are very happy to have Priya Parrotta uh, from Music and International with us. Priya Parrotta is a historian, composer, singer, author, and artist whose work dismantles and transcends borders to unite humans with each other and the more than human world. She is the founder and director of Music and the Earth International, an academic and artistic initiative which explores and celebrates the role of music in fostering environmental dialogue across borders. Through this initiative, Priya has organized conferences, published and presented articles, produced podcasts, created curricula, and composed 5 albums of original music. She is a senior fellow with the Safina Center, a United States Artist Fellowship nominee, and an elected member of the Royal Historical Society. She is also the author of The Politics of Coexistence in the Atlantic World, 2016, as well as numerous popular and scholarly articles on the relationships between cultural and musical diversity, decolonial philosophy, and environmental justice. And that today she will be talking about her research titled From Archives to Soundscapes, Integrating Historiography, Music, and Environmental Consciousness in Courses on Tropical Islands. Welcome, Priya, once again. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So let me begin by saying how happy I am to be here and delighted to have this conversation with you. And yes, to introduce myself as an interdisciplinary historian and world musician dedicated to fostering environmental consciousness in both academic and artistic terms. And as Ozge said, for the last 8 years, I've directed an initiative, a research and arts initiative called Music and the Earth International, which explores and affirms the role of music in the environmental movement and in environmental education in particular. In all of my work, I've sought to celebrate the intellectual, artistic, and imaginative power of traditions and innovations across the global South, from South Asia to the Mediterranean, to the Greater Caribbean, to the Greater Pacific. I believe strongly that cultural and spiritual pluralism offers a profound resistance to colonial, patriarchal, and anthropocentric power. I've therefore been guided by a vision of the world in which we can productively engage across borders, in particular in the service of the ecosystems we love. Tropical islands have been my academic focus, beginning with my first book, The Politics of Coexistence in the Atlantic World, which presented 12 examples of ways in which hybridity has served to circumvent colonial dynamics in the Greater Caribbean. And I've been interested in the modes by which cross-cultural dialogue in the Global South can lead to new ways of knowing, of engaging with contemporary problems, of resisting and protesting, and ultimately in designing beautiful visions for the future. My music has been based upon similar principles. And so as a singer, composer, songwriter, and producer, I've sought to create cultural landscapes in my songs that make it easier for us to connect emotionally, spiritually, and across borders in the service of different ecosystems. And in general, I believe that it is important to combine scholarship and art in university teaching to engage both the left and the right brain in the service of sustainability, environmental justice, and peace in a time of profound crisis. So this talk is divided into 3 main sections with musical interludes. The first section is an overview of my scholarship on tropical beach tourism. The second is an explanation of the role of music in fostering solidarities between students on tropical islands. And the third is the details of a course which I'm currently designing, which seeks to combine those 2 areas, music and archival historical research. The music you'll hear today is all written, composed, and sung by me and produced by me. So with that introduction, I would like to begin with a song called Normandy. The Normandy is a hotel on the coastline of San Juan, Puerto Rico, which is where I was born and partially raised. For many decades, this structure has been abandoned for the last 25 years or so, left to crumble away. And perhaps in my mind, I've always dreamed in time to be rewilded. However, recently, the property was bought by a new luxury developer who wishes to renovate the structure, transform it once again into a coveted luxury destination, and in the process undertake other construction like the building of a parking lot, which will have a detrimental impact on all of the beings who live upon these shores. So it's something that's very worrying to all of us who love that beach, and in my case, have wished for that structure to be turned into something very different. In the song, the singer and a beloved friend walk by the crumbling edifice of this hotel and wish that this space could be transformed into a home for the more than human plants and animals who live nearby. The song incorporates influences such as jazz and flamenco, the latter of which has long been associated with deep yearning, to express a profound desire to convert spaces of luxury into spaces for nature. The song is written and sung in Spanish, so if you will look at the chat, the first message on the chat is the translation of the lyrics, and then the subsequent two messages are the translation of the lyrics that I will be sharing at other points in this talk. So, without further ado, let's find this.
Atardecer y un camino, un cielo de oro y vino, doblamos la esquina y vimos las ruinas. Una vez había sido un epicentro de lujo, pero ahora está vacío, abandonado y oscuro. Que se vaya lo anticuado, que desmorona nuestros pies. Nos despedimos al pasado y a este nuevo sueño burgués. Pero donde hay una caída también hay potencial, y nos invita la vida a respirar y que se vaya lo anticuado, que desmorona nuestros pies. Nos despedimos al pasado y a este nuevo sueño burgués. No quiero un palacio, no quiero esta riqueza, lo que quiero es un espacio para la naturaleza. No quiero un palacio, no quiero esta riqueza, lo que quiero es un espacio para la naturaleza. Que se vaya lo anticuado, que desmorona nuestros pies. Nos despedimos al pasado y a este nuevo sueño burgués.
It has been said many times that tropical coastlines are microcosms of the world. After all, many of the most pivotal encounters between people, societies, economic systems, and indeed whole cosmologies have occurred on beaches. One of the most prevalent of these encounters today, however, is unfortunately brought about by the global beach tourism industry. This brings me to the first part of the talk, which is a discussion of my recent research on the first 40 years, of the commercialization of the beach zone of Waikiki, Hawaii, between the years of 1890 and 1930. This research, which I completed and submitted as a doctoral thesis just a few days ago, has led me to some poignant and sobering findings about the legal, ecological, social, and discursive processes by which coastal zones are transformed into luxury destinations. It focuses in particular on the role of the commercial press in reporting and justifying these upheavals. The dynamics I will share with you in a moment are by no means limited to the beach zones which were commercialized at the turn of the 20th century, however. On the contrary, as so many of us who live on tropical coastlines are well aware, they are continuing in full force in the form of disaster capitalism. Particularly in the aftermath of natural disasters, coastal zones around the world are being acquired for the purposes of luxury real estate and tourism. This project of mine, titled The Paradise Industry, was designed so that eventually it can serve as a guide for students in diverse coastal locations in the global south to research the past and present dynamics on the beaches they know and love. The history of the early commercialization of Waikiki Beach offers important insights into how the more than human world has been discursively transformed into a source of profit, whose sentience and suffering is of no importance. It also illustrates the immense power of the press to not only entice people to visit the beach, but also to further a portrayal of the beach which strips it of the meaning that it held and still holds for the countless millions of humans, plants, and animals who live upon its shores. Commercial beach tourism in Waikiki, excuse me, was built upon long-standing ideas about paradise, travel, and privilege, reconfigured to suit the interests of an emerging elite. It was premised upon a perception that the more than human world is ontologically separate from humanity, a landscape, a resource, and ultimately a commodity. Politically and economically, Waikiki tourism was enabled by a paradigm of land tenure in which land is divided into purchasable units. It's a system, as we know, ideologically buttressed by the idea that coastlines are to be owned and developed rather than cared for and sustained. The legislative changes, such legislative changes led directly to the creation of Waikiki's early real estate market, an endeavor which involved Hawaii's most prominent haole, or Euro-American politicians, plantation owners, and shipping magnates. These individuals were united not only in a desire to buy, lease, and sell land in Waikiki, but also in a belief that annexation by the United States would advance their commercial interests. This too would have an enormous impact upon life in Waikiki. Hawaii's annexation by the United States coincided with the beginning of the development of the first luxury resorts at Waikiki, as well as a massive acquisition of coastal land by the United States Army. Contrary to the well-established idea that the beach is somehow a place removed from the gritty unfolding of politics, Waikiki was deeply affected by the political upheavals which took place as Hawaii entered the 20th century. As the Hawaiian monarchy fell, new waves of wealthy American tourists would visit Waikiki and stay in the hotels there. The erosion of Hawaiian sovereignty and the growth of tourism were not independent events. They occurred simultaneously, each ensuring that the other would continue without interruption. The ecological implication of these events was profound. The changes which took place regarding water use, transportation, marine life, and Waikiki's wetlands were enabled and justified by the idea that coastal nature was valuable only insofar as it was able to provide for the short-term needs and enjoyments of well-to-do residents and visitors. The commercial press actively aided and abetted these transformations by making them seem desirable and very often inevitable. Ecologically speaking, the geography of the commercial beach is thus characterized by so many hidden costs. The implications of dynamiting coral reefs, dredging canals to drain wetlands, importing sand, and diverting water for excessive commercial and recreational use are still made invisible to the general public. Natural beauty, abundance, and convenience on the beach is therefore constructed too. After all, while Waikiki's tourism industry purported to offer these delights, the process which it orchestrated, in fact, denied the neighborhood's marine and terrestrial beings the ability to live in peace. Socially, the geography of the commercial beach is equally the result of specific historical processes. As Waikiki ceased to be a quiet suburb beloved by generations of indigenous Hawaiian chiefs, traditional practices of rest and recreation, such as surfing and hula, were either eliminated or appropriated as a new sociocultural paradigm took hold. In the 1890s, local haole elite in Waikiki played games, held parties, and entertained themselves by day and by night. In the articles they printed about their own social lives, they drew upon Waikiki's historical importance as a place of rejuvenation for Hawaiian royalty, using the commercial press to reframe that whole legacy to make themselves somehow a part of it. As hotels began to be built, these same individuals engaged in debates about who deserved to eat, sleep, and get drunk in the neighborhood's newly constructed hotels. In the wake of annexation and with the entry of the army to Waikiki's shores, a growing recreational culture consisting of events such as regattas and sports such as appropriated surfing and canoeing emerged. Central to this recreational culture was the celebration of the haole athlete, for by this time, Waikiki had become a place where American ideas about physical culture coincided with the appropriation of indigenous practices that were born and nurtured in an entirely different landscape. And as Waikiki entered the 1920s, the neighborhood burst onto the national stage, appearing in films, used in advertising, and heralded as a top-class destination by an emerging class of celebrities. As these political, economic, and social events unfolded, the commercial press was engaged in another endeavor. This was to create and cement a discourse which I call beachism, by printing first-person narratives by visitors to Waikiki. These narratives served to mythologize and personalize the tropical beach vacation, and thus obscure the physical upheavals which occurred to make luxury travel to Waikiki possible. And this type of writing about beaches continues in magazines and publications like Forbes. This discourse, found in both poetry and prose in these papers, ordered the relationships between the traveler, the ecosystem, the local social context, and the built landscape in specific ways. Its progression in this period corresponded to the stages of the evolution of travel writing in the modern period more broadly. In the 1890s, for instance, these narratives gave the impression that Waikiki was a place to be discovered, which echoes those early discovery narratives that occurred, beginning at the end of the 15th century. And by the end of the 1920s, it becomes clear that Waikiki's reputation preceded itself, and that it had become one of the world's most popular destinations. And this, too, is a portrayal that we see all the time around well-worn beach tourism destinations. And implicated in all of these travel narratives are certain assumptions about class and gender and race and nature and culture, which complement each other and make this homogenizing discourse of beachism as extensive as it is enduring. Tropical beach tourism has now become a global industry, and its logic is embedded not only in beach travel itself, but more broadly in prevailing ideas about privilege, luxury, and a life well lived. Now, in a time of escalating wealth disparities and the increased encroachment of wealthy commercial interests on coastlines in the aftermath of climate events, war, and other disasters, Waikiki's history offers crucial lessons. Equally today, Indigenous voices around the world are uniting in defense of the earth. As Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiian activists and scholars have consistently argued for over a century, the beach remains an important practical and philosophical ground zero in broader struggles for sustainability and sovereignty. So my intention in this research was to lay out piece by piece the various terrains in which this is the case. And I did so in the hopes of making it easier to confront each of these dynamics and support a global movement to address the commercialization of tropical shores at its deepest foundations. Ultimately, I undertook this research to expose the barriers to kindness that exist on tropical coastlines, the way that commercialization has shattered relations between us and plants and animals, has led to the systemic exploitation of all beings, and I would go so far as to say, shattered something within us too, the desire to connect to nature and to heal. Paradise, after all, has now been defined for us in ways that are profoundly violence-based, violence towards land, towards the plant life and non-human animals who live upon it, as well as human beings. We need to move away from this violence-based idea of paradise and instead work towards a vision of a better world, which is based upon non-harm, and even more than that, based upon a profound kindness. When we look at philosophies such as the Indigenous Hawaiian philosophy of aloha aina, or love of land, it becomes abundantly clear that these are the sorts of worldviews which should form the foundation of global citizenship. These are philosophies and practices which are premised upon ecological understanding, deep responsibility, and ultimately an ethic of care which directly resists the destruction of the paradise industry. And it's true that an alarmingly small number of people, both during the first Gilded Age and now, succeeded in creating a formidable and global industry. But what would happen if all of us chose to follow the lead of indigenous peoples and knowledge systems when it came to encounter on coastlines? If we all did so, then surely the result would be deeper and healthier and more unstoppable than anything that the elite were ever able to create. It is within our power to see clearly the violence-based processes and narratives that are involved in commercial beach tourism. It is possible to separate ourselves from the numerous ways in which the industry distorts the truth and feeds to us their ideas about what we yearn for. If we wish, we could very easily support and honor Indigenous sovereignty and leadership on tropical coastlines. And in the process of doing so, we may come to understand that paradise is not something that can be bought, sold, or consumed. If indeed there is a paradise on earth, then it is created by those who treat the earth and the beings upon it and each other with respect and kindness. And I believe that ultimately all of this is about embracing a different kind of cosmopolitanism, not one based on the exploitative commercial geographies which I explored in this thesis, but rather on multi-species respect and cooperation. This has been done before and has been affirmed in many places, from mythology and law, affirming that reciprocity. And there's no reason why global community cannot be based upon these things. And perhaps reforming our ideas about what the tropical beach is and what we do there is a way to start. So in the spirit of that sort of cosmopolitanism, I now present the second song, Frontline, which is a piece protesting the dynamics of disaster capitalism. In this composition, I sought to unite Caribbean and Indian Ocean musical influences and soundscapes to foster a sense of tropical solidarity through song.
While the waves ripple and the sun shines, hear a call from the front lines. We hardly ever hurry, because you can be wealthy here. But let's make something crystal clear. You think the island is here to sell, but we know all too very well that this is precious, sacred ground. Now be quiet and hear it sound. And we sound a crying You think the world is in your hands, that you can know the sea and sand, that the island served on a silver platter, as if all life here doesn't matter. You fancy yourself royalty, but you cannot shake our loyalty. And as you sink in your own lives, our strength soars to the skies. And we sound a cry in the hall of nations, a song for 1,000 generations, a call for a resolution, for a real and true solution, a cry for restitution, and now or never revolution. And we sound the cry in the hall of nations, a song for 1,000 generations, a call for a resolution, for a real and true solution, a cry for restitution, and now or never revolution.
So it is now well established that our current environmental crisis is taking a great toll on the mental health of young people. And in these times, it is important for students and citizens to be able to draw upon their creative reserves and participate in the vast world of the arts, be it through music or poetry or literature, performance, painting, sculpture, and so on. In the classroom, I found that songs like Frontline help to make students feel like their emotions are valid and that connection across regions in the protest of dynamics like disaster capitalism is indeed possible. This is the vision that I've been exploring in my activism and nonfiction writing and teaching thus far. And over the course of that, I've learned that a vast array of musical traditions across the globe contain important spiritual and historical insights that are valuable to the environmental movement. And when these styles are brought in dialogue with each other, it is possible to awaken new awareness of related pasts and mutually helpful wisdoms. From musical practice, I've also learned about the revolutionary power of the human voice in song. I've been surprised by its ability to invite changes in perspective that can radically transform the ways that both listeners and performers regard themselves and their responsibilities. And for these reasons, I've come to believe with assurance that solidarity in the face of common environmental realities can certainly be brought about by music. Music can reveal a great deal about the connection between humanity and the environment, including the political and social changes that need to occur for environmental justice and sustainability and true sovereignty. But these insights alone cannot achieve their possible reach without an understanding of their significance and an understanding of the place of these insights in the matrix of thought around the environment, which we have already put in place. A space is required within our minds and our practices and our policies for this kind of music and this kind of engagement with music as an important source of environmental wisdom, which within the contemporary popular world of commercial music is tends not to be there. I use a collection of essays, of my own essays, called To Dream Again, Island Environmentalism Through Music in my courses, which kind of seek to articulate that relationship between music and the environment, and in particular, its relevance for environmental dialogue and movement building on tropical islands. And I hope that those essays, which relate diverse aspects of the intersection of music and environment on islands, might contribute to a world in which islands are stronger and more powerful in the face of environmental events, because the wisdom and vitality enshrined in island music is given a space to flourish. And so there's several parts of this collection of essays. The first part discusses issues like the impacts of colonial dynamics on the practice of music around the world, and the consequent divisions between humans and non-humans, which have become a part of how music is seen today. Introduces the way in which human and non-human music can move us towards environmental awareness and island justice. There's a section of this collection that focuses on islands themselves, and in particular the role of music in helping one to recover from the traumatic consequences of natural disasters, and the role of music in fostering joy and creativity. And not only that, but also a resistance to prevailing environmental geopolitics, which tend to marginalize islands in a political and economic sense. There's a part that turns more to issues of the public sphere, and kind of how in different spaces like cities and other areas, music does or does not contribute to a sense of environmental awareness, and kind of what is needed to bring environment and natural ecosystems into the public sphere, and the role of the arts in being able to do that. And then the final part focuses on the practice of music itself, and deals directly with the challenges and opportunities associated with creating music that services the goal of environmental solidarity among islands. And there I write about subjects such as the practice of musical fusion, bringing diverse cultural influences into songs, the utilization of the singing voice, whose voice is my primary performance instrument, and ultimately the ability of music to equip us for the long and interesting process of honoring island environments in the face of the many forces, such as those which I've explored in the paradise industry, in the beach tourism industry research, which for too long have been permitted to carry on. And so in my teaching, I seek to combine archival research of the kind that was undertaken as part of this paradise industry project with music, with in some cases the practice of music, but more often music, just kind of music appreciation, and bringing music into the classroom to kind of set a mood and intention for the courses. And so I intend to teach rigorous historical investigation of phenomena like the global beach tourism industry, while also making students feel like they can creatively respond to these kinds of challenges, and very crucially, appreciate the myriad other ways in which people have culturally, artistically, and spiritually created relationships to tropical coastlines. The course that I intend to teach, which I sort of wanted to introduce here, will therefore consist of a step-by-step methodology to research luxury beach tourism and disaster capitalism on different coastlines around the world. It will also feature guest lecturers, scholars, and activists who draw upon Indigenous and Creole and subaltern cosmologies and epistemologies and tactics and art to resist different manifestations of the paradise industry. And I want this course to eventually be made available to students in public universities across the global South and on islands and tropical coastlines in particular. And so one of the things that I would be keen to discuss in the discussion is the way in which one might do that, create that kind of consortium environment where students from different geographical contexts can meet and talk to each other. And there's several antecedents to this course that I've done over the years. And so one is a module for graduate students at the University of Puerto Rico, which I was teaching this semester, called Island Environmentalism in the Arts, which focused in particular on the capacity of music and visual arts to confront environmental injustice, and sort of celebrated the power that we have to creatively imagine more harmonious relationships between humans and the more than human world on tropical islands. And it consisted of walking tours in different parts of San Juan, the capital city of Puerto Rico, and looking at the presence or the appropriation of nature in different spaces, tourist zones, the botanical garden, public parks, the shopping mall, and kind of we used those lived experiences to discuss the connections between art and environmental politics, and not only the power of art, but also the consequences of the commercialization of art for the implications of that for our relationship to the natural world. And the other course was a program called the Island Sessions, which I developed and taught in the years following the natural and political catastrophe of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico in 2017. And that was a discussion series for graduate students at the University of Puerto Rico again. And it was sort of an educational program meets a consciousness raising initiative, artistic collective center for critique, and crucially a space for therapy and shared experience. And we discussed in each session a different theme or trope that pertained to, island politics, supported by a series of recordings. And over the course of that, kind of came to learn new insights about the possible role that music could play in integrating decolonial critiques into environmental discussions. And so these courses kind of gave all of us a deeper understanding of the pedagogical role of music in environmental history and politics courses. Music is a very therapeutic medium. It can help us to address the mental health challenges which students are facing, issues that are related to our separation from the more than human world and our alienation in a world dominated by technology. It can provide a sort of geopolitical therapy for students, a sense that they're not alone in experiencing the challenges of things like disaster capitalism. And music and environmental music as well kind of challenges that idea that the rational is totally separate from the emotional and the spiritual, because I think we kind of in the academy tend to maintain that distinction to the detriment of the holistic well-being of students. And in a global multicultural world, music is also a way to really bring a sense of diversity into classroom settings and kind of model a way in which we can dialogue across cultural and geographical borders, because music just has a tremendous power to inspire awe and kinship and political awareness and empathy and wisdom. And so there's some really beautiful results that come from bringing diverse styles of world music into educational settings, especially in environmental education. And, young people are coming of age now in such precarious and difficult times. And I think this is especially true for students on tropical coastlines, where the anxieties we all feel are just compounded by the added anxiety and trauma brought about by extreme climate events and the political response to it, and the kinds of things that happen in their aftermath, like this luxury real estate, acquisition, and, just this, as I said, disaster capitalism. So, both scholarship and soundscapes, I think, carry immense power to bring comfort and community to students. And when they're brought together, I really think a certain sort of magic is possible. And so I would like to end this talk with a song that affirms the comfort that tropical coastlines can provide in turbulent times. So much of this talk has been about the challenges that we face on tropical coastlines. But I think the flip side of that is that these are really precious spaces that give us great comfort, that can give us great comfort and peace. And that's why these issues are so close to our heart to begin with. And, you know, coastlines are deeply home to so many of us. They're not, I think, as we all know, they're not just places that you visit. They're places that have deep connections for both humans and non-humans. And so this song is called Luna Laguna. And as I mentioned before, the translation of all the songs is the first 3 messages of this chat. And so with that, I will share this with you, and just thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here. And here we go. Let's see.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Priya. That was truly an insightful and inspiring presentation, particularly how you integrate historiography, you integrate music, visual arts, environmental politics, the consciousness of the environment in your work. And to deepen this discussion further, I would invite Professor Makoni to have an engagement with you for about 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Nana, and thank you very much, Priya, for this wonderful presentation.
Thank
I
you.
want to begin by asking what may come across as a very flippant, unintellectual question.
Okay.
But it is, you are a musician, you compose, you write, and you've just finished your writing your dissertation. Which of these two did you not like at all? The writing.
Which did I not? Which did I not like?
Yes, when you compare the writing the dissertation and
well,
singing and composing, when you think about it now.
Well, I think, I mean, yeah, no, I mean, first of all, I enjoyed both, including the dissertation in unexpected ways, primarily because, you know, archival research, it's so much more about storytelling than I realized at the beginning, you know, because you plumb the archives and then basically it's telling a narrative. It's turning your mind into a story. So there was more of a kind of creative element to the thesis than I originally anticipated. And of course, kind of yeah, I mean, I think dissertations are so rewarding for everybody because at the end, because it's such a major piece of research. But I think, you know, songwriting and composition, it feels like a complete medium to me, because between, you know, the lyrics and the arrangements and the soundscapes, it's for somebody who I think has a very active right side of the brain and has experienced life acoustically my whole life. There's a really nice feeling of wholeness that is a part of the musical practice. And then when you add these videos, which I produce myself, you know, it just kind of, it taps into so many different sides of oneself and aspects of the brain. And it's also like, it can be this really wonderful hypnotic thing that takes you into just a different space. And so I think, yeah, I mean, if I had to choose, I would say that the composition is kind of my more beloved practice, but like, you know, historical research was a lot more kind of rewarding, I think, than I anticipated.
Okay. Let me continue with it. I want to focus now on your interaction encounters with your supervisor that I don't know, right? Because what tends to happen is students talk about their dissertation and what they have done. That's fair. I'm curious to know how you have managed to transform the world views of this supervisor that I don't know.
Well, okay, so first of all, the university that I was doing it from was the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. My archives were in Washington, D.C., so primarily I was based here. But you know, anybody who's been up to northern Scotland, the beaches are rather different from the tropical beach. It's just this nice landscape of complete gray. And so I think in the beginning there was a certain skepticism among my advisors about the observations that I wanted to make as far as the injustices of the beach tourism industry, because from the perspective of certainly, especially people who kind of live in those types of environments, you know, they crave this type of tropical beach travel. And so I think in the beginning, there was this worry that somehow this research would, according to them, be like ideological somehow, you know, but then over the course of undertaking it and finding the evidence of just this horrible process that was involved in the commercialization of Waikiki, presenting this incontrovertible evidence, you know, I think their attitudes about it are different now. And so it went from being this thing that is they worried was just like a matter of opinion or something to, just the truth.
So what happened was they were initially worried that it was ideological, but at the end of the dissertation, they became ideological themselves.
Perhaps. I mean, to me, it was never ideological because you grow up in these places, you observe these dynamics, but I think there can be a defensiveness among other people who want to travel to beaches when you start talking about this.
Now, let me ask slightly more serious questions. You talk about disaster capitalism. Can you elaborate a little bit what exactly that means?
Well, disaster capitalism is a phrase that was coined by the journalist Naomi Klein, but basically it is the phenomenon of I guess politicians and people of wealth and influence taking advantage of catastrophic environmental, political, or economic events to further their own interests. And it's really, like in Puerto Rico, for instance, after Hurricane Maria, it's just been an awful situation because, the inevitable kind of instability that's brought about by these disasters created the conditions for this very terrifying, massive acquisition of coastal land for luxury real estate development and luxury, not only luxury tourism, but also luxury settlement. So one of the big motivations of this research was that real concern that this is happening in the present. There's such little transparency that we don't know really what's going on or what enables this. And oddly, it's easier to uncover those secrets in something that happened 130 years ago rather than what we're living with now. And so that was a big provocation for this.
So where does the gentrification fit in this concept called disaster capitalism, or does it?
It can. I mean, I think disaster capitalism takes this form. The gentrification is the inevitable result, and we're seeing this. People being priced out of the buildings and sometimes the whole neighborhoods where they've lived their whole lives. And so I think, that type of construction and development and gentrification just go hand in hand in so many places.
And then the other concept that you use quite frequently, but I wasn't clear how you were framing it. You were talking about the global south. What did you have in mind? Was you deploy it quite a lot in the way you talk? So I wanted to get a sense of what exactly do you have in mind when you're talking about the global south?
Yeah, well, in this case, I suppose what I'm referring to in particular when we're talking about this kind of environmental dialogue across borders, island environmental dialogue across borders, is students in public universities in coastal and tropical coastal locations. But I know this classification of the global north and south, there are holes in it because the histories of so many places have created these dynamics. So but in this case, I mean students who are living on tropical coast.
Okay. Then asked a very practical question that you posed the question this to us and to yourself. You wanted to design a course that will be accessible to students from different geographical localities. So you wanted an answer about how that would look like or how you could go about it.
Well, I guess, I mean, the fact that now we have these technologies like Zoom, I mean, this forum that you all are able to have weekly, which is just wonderful. I mean, in practical terms, that's kind of how I visualize what I also imagine is creating a repository of resources that are accessible to, all of the students who enroll in this, resources around, I guess, just archival material about these issues, but also maybe other material on the types of resistance to these dynamics on coastal zones that has occurred. It would be nice to have that. And also, I think, since this whole idea of accessing one's creative capacities is something that I believe in so much, maybe also having a designated, repository for students' creative responses to the course, because in these modules that I've been teaching at the University of Puerto Rico, a component of it has been these creative pieces that are, focused on island politics. So I guess it would be, so the in-class thing would be Zoom, but then also having these other resources, maybe it would be by like university subscription, and universities sponsoring it, students have access, something like that.
My limited experience with this and experimentation is that I was teaching a course, a graduate course at Penn State, but I had a colleague who was at a university in Kenya, and her students would Zoom in at a particular time. So her students and my students at Penn State would be attending the same course. And then they were sort of joint teaching, me and her teaching together, even though we're in different geographical spaces. And that was quite enriching, because if you are talking and debating issues, let's say like the Global South, it's good to have in quotes, representatives from of students from that particular locality. And you can pair the students here in the United States with those that were in Kenya, for example. And it was a very dynamic class, and it was useful, although it disturbed the sleep of the other students. But that was the price we had to pay. So I think such arrangements are doable.
That's great.
Are really doable because of technology, and it enables us to have a bigger impact, and for the students to have a bigger access to us without having to do a lot of traveling.
Well, that's very encouraging to know. And one of the reasons I was glad to be here is maybe to get some some insights into logistically how one might do this. I think another challenge also is just kind of getting the word out, and could sort of seeking the collaboration of other faculty in different universities, because I think I would envision this as a collaborative process, and it comes out of this desire for mutual learning and just pooling our resources to be able to seek solidarity.
Yes, because I conceptualize universities, whatever they are even now, are not monolithic. They are made up of many moving parts. Some are dominant and domineering, others are more democratizing. So in a sense, the strategy is to be able to identify the democratizing sites within these multiple moving parts in a university. Because even in any even very conservative neoliberal university, not all parts are moving in the same direction. Not all of them are totally resistant to change. There are cracks within those. So the issue is to identify conceptually that change is possible within this movement. And you are able to move on and insert changes within it. In some cases, there's no point. In some institutions, parts of university, there's no point in trying to attempt to change that, because nothing will change that. But others, they are much more open to accept, they're much more receptive to change, because universities are multiple moving parts.
Yeah, yeah. Which I guess I mean that's sort of why I'm particularly interested in public universities. Not that
Yes.
challenge there as well, but I mean I know from experience that in private universities there's that often a huge disconnect between what is taught in class and the overall priorities of the university and sometimes even the students.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Now my last question is you're talking about music. For you, music is not simply a human product. Animals, plants also have music. Is that the case? Is that what you were saying?
Yes. Yeah,
Oh.
I would agree, and I would think that like it's we in this is a larger conversation, but the commercialization of music has and also the impacts of colonialism on the way that we think about music created such a divide between us and the way that we produce music and the natural world. And this is not by any means the way that music has always been, I mean, I think it's the contrary. It's really been a way of connecting to the natural world, and sometimes in these sort of directly mimetic ways, like there's flute traditions that have evolved to and stuff. So like it's not a given that all music helps us to those non-human beings, but I think it's an important charge for musicians today to restore that idea, that way of practicing music.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Let me hand over to Nana Anna and Damasi. Thank you very much for this. It has been a useful conversation.
Thank you so much.
Anna.
Yes, there are a couple of comments and questions in the chat box. I'll start with that before we open the room for submissions. Eric wants to find out if your essays are open access.
They are not currently, and that's sort of I'm sort of in the process of deciding what to do in that regard, because generally I've been using them as tools in my teaching. However, some of them have been published as journal articles in like popular, not popular, but yeah, more popular music magazines and that kind of thing. So if you go to my website, which I'll put in the chat, and go to the publications tab, a fair number of them are available in some version in these other publications.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So Vishna has a comment. Her comment is in relation to your question concerning how to disseminate your work after you're done. And she says there are some people who are doing decolonial work and they walk the decolonial talk. So she suggested Alisa Hartek and Mandada. And yeah, so that is that. People who are interested could follow them and see what they are doing.
Great, thank you. Very useful.
We have a question from Sibusi. So the question is that, well, he's excited that you combine art, tourism, environmental justice, and global capitalism. And he questions how the political or capitalist economy in the different geographies would accept your propositions from universities, private capital, and government.
How you mean if my propositions were given by suggested by universities rather than by us, by scholars? Is that what you mean?
Well, he is here, so let's see if he can unmute and explain further what exactly he means by his question. Sibusiso, are you available to do that?
Yeah, okay. So what I'm interested in knowing is whether these ideas would come from a specific faculty or discipline where you are located, and maybe they appeal more to that audience, and how they would be taken out maybe towards the local, the communities, the coastal communities, if they would also then be, where the tensions would occur between maybe those who want to bring in investment and also maybe those who would like to develop their own communities. I mean, all those contradictions, whether you have considered their implications even towards the public, governmental, political economy as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess how that would play out would depend on the context, but I think one of the things that is really a guiding, force for me, first of all, is sort of this multidisciplinary, multimedia approach to environmental education. So kind of cross different professional contexts and so on. But I think also, in a time where so much of art and education is privatized, the principle of this type of education being available to everybody, I think affirms a much more timeless idea of creativity and the arts being the thing that is accessible to everybody. And I also, in that collection of essays that I talked about, To Dream Again, a big part of this is, how potentially if you bring in, music into these educational settings or into community settings, there's a really empowering aspect to that fact, because so much of our international infrastructure for environmental decision making is so dominated by moneyed interests. I mean, even at the COP, the UN Conference of the Parties, they have like a special session for the fossil fuel industry, and whereas art should be something that is accessible to everybody. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think, kind of a guiding principle of this is the democratization of education and so on.
Okay, thanks for that. Eric has a comment regarding your essays not being open access, accessible for everybody, and he calls it disaster capitalism. Would you agree with him?
Absolutely not. The essays are not restricted to an elite few. They're available completely online. They're just published in other publications, which are completely open to. I mean, they can be read by anybody, including the journal articles. They're all, in publications that are, totally available. And that it is a form of disaster capitalism seems like I would be curious to pull that question back to you and ask what you mean by that, given that disaster capitalism is the taking away of land in the aftermath of environmental trauma. So if you would like to explain what you mean by writing about
thank you. First, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. And I mean, I learned disaster capitalism today, so it's possible that I'm be struggling to understand it. But one of the things that I thought I understood about disaster capitalism is that it sees, I mean, about your, I want to talk about your approach to life, blending music with blending emotions with land, the environment, and the human cognition and stuff like that. And the way I understand it is that they are inseparable.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, and I would clearly say, as a language teacher, one of the things that I've encouraged my trainees to do is to make sure that music is part of the ways through which they relax the tense atmosphere, which their cognitive focus in the classroom, the effects of the cognitive focus of the classroom. So they bring in music to make everything affordable to students and maybe accessible and probably enjoyable to students, because it's a whole that combines to knowledge accessibility. So if it's a whole, and we have some ASs which are very useful, which people will need to consume, they have to buy. Would I be wrong calling that again disaster capitalism? Well, I'm not saying particularly in your case, because you've said yours are open access, but there are many others which are not open access.
That's true. Yeah, and I think with music, it's in the world of commercial music in particular, it's so intensely policed in the sense that there are like legal and financial consequences to using, you know, copyrighted music, even in classroom settings where there's no money at stake, you know. So one of the things that, you know, my music is freely available to the public. It's available, I mean, you know, it could be used not only in my courses, but in other people's courses. And you know, I believe that it's quite kind of pure in its calls for environmental justice. And I wanted to kind of maintain an integrity in that sense, you know. So I'm a completely non-commercial artist, and I kind of, you know, I believe in its power to democratize education, and that is not an idea that is shared by most people within the commercial music industry. So in that too, I try to do it differently.
Thanks for that. I have a question. As a PhD student, I'm really interested in methods. So my question is, what are the ethical considerations that guide the methodology you chose, which includes drawing upon the histories and the cultures of these tropical islands for artistic creation and even for curriculum development? I'm particularly interested in how you ensure respectful representation and how you avoid appropriation.
Well, I think that ultimately, you know, I would want courses that I teach on this to have space for local environmental activists, you know, indigenous conservationists, people who really know these situations as they unfold, to share firsthand and first person their insights and wisdom. As far as my own research was concerned, it was a pretty kind of straight archival study, which means that you're using in some ways the colonial archive, but it's an oppositional reading of those sources. You know, so basically I was looking at the way that the commercial press in Hawaii and across the nation reported on and justified the changes in Waikiki. But of course, I didn't look at that material, you know, that as a source of factual information. You know, it was more a study of how the beach is constructed by these forces. And my reason for focusing specifically on those is that we still have publications, like I said, like Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, that do often word for word what was done in those newspapers. So to me, that study is just one part of what I would want the course to be, you know. So my contribution to it would be, having done this careful reading of the archive, then you create the space for, you know, people in these different locations who know the realities on the ground and steward wonderful wisdom to speak to students themselves.
Thanks. Do we have anybody who would want to jump in with a comment or a question?
Anna, I was about texting again because I'm not very sure about my connectivity where I am. Now, I was just going to tell Priya that I fell in love with the soothing music she played in the background as much as I did with disaster capitalism. And
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, and I was going to ask you if you believe in sustainable development, that expression, sustainable development. How would you analyze sustainable development vis-a-vis disaster capitalism?
Well, I mean, my understanding is that this phrase sustainable development is just used, you know, it's used so often and sometimes not properly defined. And so, you know, an example from tourism might be, you know, when people talk about ecotourism, no tourism that's done with environmental responsibility and all. But what this research has taught me is that the devil is in the details, you know. So we have these phrases like ecotourism, but in order to evaluate the integrity of these projects, like there are many specific questions about specific cases that need to be asked, you know. So in the case of tourism, it's things like, you know, where is the money coming from? Where exactly is it going? You know, what are the environmental impacts, and not just talking about how these forms of tourism are better than other forms of tourism. Like, do the research and really understand what's going on on the ground. So to me, it's kind of looking beyond these terms and asking kind of more specific questions that need to be answered.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Priya.
You're welcome to jump in if you have a question or submission. It could be a comment.
Yes, I have a question. Yes, thank you so much for the useful presentation. My question is about writing. When you come to write, have you thought about writing in the way you do music?
I'm sorry? I'm sorry?
My question is about writing. When you come to write about this, have you thought about writing from the perspective of the way of doing music?
Writing about the perspective of the way of doing music, you mean?
Yeah, playing music and yeah.
Well, I do keep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do keep my own notes as I go through, composition, because I mean, one of the beauties and perhaps also the frustrations of being a musician is that, like, the actual composition and the actual song is just the tip of an iceberg of a huge thought process that has gone on. And in my case, like all sorts of historical research that I've done and everything, and all of that kind of ends up, much of it ends up, one would hope, in the song itself. But I also kind of keep.
How are you, darling? Back from school.
Yeah, I also keep notes about that.
Why did you come back earlier?
Which eventually, which I will kind of release and publish as it feels comfortable. There's just like so much behind the scenes, stuff that goes into songwriting that, eventually I look forward to sharing.
Okay. There is a question from Mama Dobia, and she appreciates your presentation. And she says your description of how paradise has been redefined to us via violence to nature and the land, she finds it very powerful. And that resonates with me too. I like how you describe that we should approach the coastlines with kindness. That's another form of kindness I haven't really thought of. So yeah, I agree that it was very powerful. But she wants to ask about your thoughts on the idea of selling paradise to us versus others, versus other consumers engaging with nature, like real estate developers, store operators engaging in selling paradise to us through luxury getaways and ambitious construction projects that destroy the land. It gives an example of Accra, Ghana, where at the moment there are plans to transform a 241 beachfront through a marine drive that is more industrial and based on environmental sustainability. And she adds that the monies that will be gained from these necessarily do not go to the people who are displaced from these areas, yet they are sold to us as economic money. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, this is so common. I mean, that's such an oft repeated refrain that tourism is wonderful for the economy, and that we have signs in the neighborhood that I grew up in San Juan, where a lot of this settlement, and I'm calling it settlement because it is settlement. It's not only tourism, it's also like luxury. They're encouraging the migration, the settlement of wealthy investors. We have all these like signs up in the neighborhood saying that, for every dollar invested in this new condo project, X amount will be generated. But generated for who? I discovered in the process of doing this research that like all of these hotels, the common ones, the Best Western and the Marriott and the Hilton, they're all conglomerates owned, like they're all owned by like 3 companies. And, when you think about how much money they make off tourist zones and do so with this justification that it's good for the economy. I mean, I think when you start looking at the details, as I said, the devil is in the details, and it's only good for the economy if the money is going back to people. And I think there's just so much corporate capture of these profits that, to take those arguments with a grain of salt, which isn't to say that tourism is always terrible for the economy, but like it has to actually be going to people rather than just this vague justification for it on those grounds.
Thank you. Dorothy thanks you for your insightful presentation, and She wants to find out if there are examples of ethical tourism or regenerative tourism initiatives in your area of study that attempt to balance economic prosperity with cultural preservation and genuine connection. Do you know of any?
Well, in this research, absolutely not. I mean, it's just such a unquestionably, destructive and appropriative story. But I do know in many places, including in Hawaii, there's this intention to bring some element of cultural education into into the hotels and into these zones. That those kinds of things, I sometimes also feel like it's not, at least like personally, it's not really my place to determine whether or not that's a positive or negative thing. I think that's really something that the people who are, involved in that, the cultural, the people who are involved in this new kind of cultural programming, it's up to, they are the ones who can say, whether or not this is an improvement or just another form of appropriation. And I think that's just a very, when it comes to arts and culture, that's a very complicated situation. And, initially I was going to include music in this study and eventually didn't, because I realized, I mean, there's definitely, it's a complicated thing, because I think, a lot of artists depend on this kind of revenue to continue their work. On the other hand, that itself speaks to sort of the systemic situation that, money is only available within the context of tourism in some cases. And I would like to think that there is a possibility for that cultural connection and dialogue to happen in tourism, but I tend to be of the opinion that in order for that to happen, we need to kind of question a lot of the premises upon which tourism is based, not the least of which is that, for like the beach, for instance, that it's a place where you kind of leave behind all responsibility and do whatever you want. I mean, that is inevitably going to be in conflict with the type of respect that should be a part of travel and encounter.
Desmond, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Priya. This has been not only stimulating but calming to listen to the songs. So I echo others who appreciate what you.
Thank you.
I know that Makoni teaches, or perhaps used to teach, a course on Africa in films. I do that at my own university here in the Chicago area, and the goal for me, as I think might be for Makoni, although I'm sure he will probably be in a better position to speak for the course he teaches. The goal is to extend beyond the use of print text as the sole legitimate source of codified knowledge. I get a sense that young people, students certainly, are thirsty for rethinking what knowledge is through other media. And the integration of music and historical analysis, specifically when engaging with archives, to me is sort of a new way of approaching that same issue that I find quite refreshing. And you left me wondering if there might be an opportunity here, perhaps maybe to ask if you know of anyone who's put together a repertoire of songs that someone can use to engage with that, historical inquiry critically, especially those that engage with empire and coloniality and so forth. And if there is none, I wonder if the time is ripe for us to begin to do something like that, like a collaborative effort to pull together resources, because we do have a lot of handy resources of print materials. And even more recently, a number of other audiovisual materials on a range of topics. There are some universities that host web pages with resources on, say, DEI, for instance. But I don't know of any about the use of music or films to teach. So if this is something you know more about, I would love to know of such resources. And if it doesn't exist, I wonder if this is something you are open to working on. If you have, I think you are an expert on this already. If it's something you choose to work on, consider someone like me, and I'm hoping I'm not volunteering Marconi too eagerly here, but also Marconi are people that might be willing to sort of throw in whatever pebbles we can into the pond.
That sounds wonderful. I would love to continue that discussion, and I think it's true. There isn't, I've not come across a resource like that, and I think I have two comments about that. The first is that I think once again, this has something to do with what I would go so far as to call like the commercial regime in the production and dissemination of music. It's just very policed, as I said before, and these more timeless ideas of music as being communal, being free, being connected, as you say, connected to history and connected to social issues. This, I think, is something that's really missing in the world of commercial music. And in many ways, my own music is motivated by that absence. When I started Music in the Earth 8 years ago, it wasn't initially my intention to be composing music. I thought it was going to be kind of more a research initiative about, other people's music, which to a certain extent it was, but then also over time it moved into composition because I really felt like there was an absence of that type of material. That said, it exists in the world, so I would say that in moving forward with this idea, which I think is wonderful, I would volunteer my own music because that connection between environmental history and the arts is very much present in a lot of my songs. And then I think there's also, combined with that, there should be this conversation about, the types of music which are excluded from the way in which we typically consume music, and how to create resources for professors and for students that give them access to that material.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. I'm just thinking, really, if this was to materialize, I can imagine so many people who might be interested in designing a new course, but wouldn't know where to turn. And something like this might be a handy resource to lean on, at least to begin that conversation, and maybe also lead them to people not only within the academia, people like you, but outside of the academia who might be guest speakers, who might sort of engage in a larger conversation. But I think mark the direction I hope the academia goes in extending the horizon in terms of what we consider knowledge and its sources. But again, thank you so much for this session.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think there's ways in which in the past music has served a much deeper pedagogical and historical, and political function than it seems to now. There's a wonderful book on kind of the indigenous music and politics of performance and so on, called Hungry Listening, in which one of the chapters is about how in Canada, he's Canadian, at one point, music was used as a form of law, and so in these judicial cases and trials about appropriation of land and things, music was brought in by indigenous communities and appellants as a form of legal, as a form of legal protest, or as a form, so there's, music has served so many functions beyond the individual creator releasing music and making a profit. It's a much wider thing, and I think it's important for us to affirm that.
Thank you, Priya, for a truly engaging and thought-provoking conversation. And we are not done yet. This is the formal session. We are going to bring the curtain down on the formal session, and then we will zoom into the after party. But before then, next week we have Adibenya Frei Machado, who is from the University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And we hope to see you here next week. The flyers will go out today and possibly a reminder next week. Please do remember to join us next week. At this point, I will pause the recording and then we'll zoom into the after party, which is the unmoderated, unrecorded version.